G'day guys, Games Workshop have just released the new Arcs of Omen missions and changes and all of those sorts of things on their community page, and what I want to do is I want to break down these changes through a specific Chaos Space Marine lens. There's going to be a ton of videos out there talking about these changes in a broad sense. What I want to do in this video is break down the impacts this is going to have on Chaos Space Marine players, because there's some absolute ripper new rules in here that are going to make Chaos Space Marines really formidable on the tabletop. So I want to break down what that means for the Chaos Space Marine players specifically, and then maybe later down the track, if this video gains traction, I'll do a broader sort of video as well. So with that being said, let's get into the video.
Look for the Blood God.
Alrighty guys, let's start off with a real quick disclaimer, and that is that all we have is the information presented to us from the Warhammer community page, and they haven't given us everything. So it's entirely possible that there are some things in here that we've missed, and as a result, take all of this with a slight grain of salt. That being said, they were pretty good with the information that they did, so we can have a pretty good understanding of what this is going to be. For those of you wondering what the Arcs of Omen mission pack is going to be, basically it's going to replace your Nephilim mission pack, which replaced the Nachman before it. And it's basically going to contain all these new secondary objectives, all these new detachment types, all of these new sort of specific rules for the way that you match play 40k. So if you're looking at running a tournament competitive list, this is going to be your Bible. This is where you're going to go for all of the rules required to run that tournament style list. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into the first of the many absolutely massive changes. Alright, so the first change that we've got is that there is a new detachment called the Arcs of Omen detachment. Now, they weren't 100% clear whether or not this was going to replace the existing detachments or be a supplementary detachment. That being said, it's an amazingly flexible detachment that's going to probably, in practice, replace the existing detachments. So you've got a HQ, is your first mandatory slot, and it's just a single HQ. Then you can add either 3 troops, or 3 elites, or 3 fast attack, or 3 heavy support, or 3 lords of war. So that is your compulsory component of the detachment. This detachment is going to cost you 0 CP also. Then once you've taken your 4 mandatory units, your HQ and your 3, of whichever slot, you can then add up to 9 additional troops, up to 3 additional elites, up to 3 additional fast attack, up to 3 additional heavy support, up to 3 additional lords of war, up to 3 additional HQ, up to 2 flyers, up to 3 fortifications, up to another 3 elites, provided that they are character units, and then 1 dedicated transport for every infantry unit taken. Alrighty, so let's talk specifically for Chaos Space Marines here. Now, one of the big implications here is that if you were building your Chaos Space Marine list around a Vanguard, Spearhead, or Outrider detachment, one of the ones that previously was going to be a HQ and 3 of the elites fast or heavy support slots, that used to cost you 3 CP. Now it's going to cost you nothing, which means all of those detachments have just become massively relevant. Further to that, your options to expand that detachment are more. So previously, if you took something like a Vanguard, you get a certain number of elite slots, but you're very limited in the fast attack and the heavy support that you can take. Now you can take your elites heavy army and still put in 3 heavy support units instead of the previous 2 that you were limited to. So those detachments gain a massive benefit, and some of those detachments are very strong for Chaos Space Marines, particularly the Vanguard with all of the elite units. Now you don't necessarily need to take cultists, and you don't necessarily need to take legionaries. You can just go, cool, I'm just going to fill up on elites choices, which again, you might not want to do. You might like having those screening units in your army. Cultists are a very valuable screening unit, and also having legionaries with their Balefire Tomb is also really, really good. So I think there's some value in those units still. So we'll see whether Chaos Space Marine players pivot off of those units into a more elite heavy army. But being able to take just a shit ton of elites without really paying any penalties is really good. And Chaos Space Marines have multiple ways, depending on what legion you play, of gaining objectives secured on those models. So as a result, you don't necessarily need those troops for the purposes of objective holding. They're mainly there for cheap disposable things that can be in your backfield, doing banners, that sort of stuff. So we'll see whether or not Chaos Space Marines pivot away from that. I'd be hesitant to drop my cultists. They're often very, very powerful units in my army. However, maybe you don't need to have 3. Maybe you just go 1 unit of Legionnaires for the Balefire Tome, 1 unit of cultists for raising my banners, and then just go hard on the elites, you know? So that's an option. The next really interesting thing about this detachment for the Chaos Space Marines players is that you can take 0 to 3 Lord of War in that detachment for 0 command points. So this is huge because it means you could run 3 Lord of Skulls, which previously would have had to be a super heavy detachment, which would have cost you 6 command points. Now it costs you nothing. So that's crazy. Being able to go 3 Lord of War, 3 Lord of Skulls, and then use those excess points to put in a Lord Discordant, you know, and some scoring elements like, you know, your infantry or whatever, and having that all cost you 0 CP. And now you're free to load up on stratagems and, you know, pre-game relics and that sort of stuff in your list. That's absolutely phenomenal. Those types of lists just got a huge glow up. And also, because it's a 0 to 3, you could take just 2 Lord of Skulls. You know, maybe you only want to have 2 of them in the list. And that's obviously also really powerful. Previously, that would have cost you a ton of CP because you would have had to take 2 auxiliary support detachments. And even further to this, if you do take 1 or 2, because you are no longer taking an auxiliary support detachment, those Lord of War are gonna gain your Legion trait. So previously, if you wanted a Legion trait on a Lord of Skulls, you had to take 3 of them, right? Because you had to take it in a super heavy detachment, which was going to cost you 6 CP. So we pretty much didn't look into that because we were like, no one's taking that because you're blowing all of your command points and you have to have 3 Lord of Skulls. So that pretty much meant that the Lord of Skulls was treated as if it would just never gain a Legion trait. But now that you can put it in that detachment, which means it's going to gain the Legion trait of that detachment, means that we need to look into the Lord of Skulls again. There's a few spicy things that you can do with it. Iron Warriors can make a practically unkillable Lord of Skulls because you can't reroll to wound against it. You can make it neg 1 to be wounded. You can make it neg 1 damage. You can make this thing really, really tough. You can heal it really, really well with a nearby Warp Smith. There's some really crazy stuff you can do with it. Iron Warriors or Creations of Bile, fighting on death. That's insane, especially because Lord of Skulls get more dangerous as they degrade. So being able to throw a Lord of Skulls in and then just fight on death and just absolutely eviscerate anything that tries to touch you, that's really spicy as well. There's tons of really spicy stuff that you can do with the Lord of Skulls. So we might do a separate video breaking down the Lord of Skulls specifically. But yeah, they're my main initial takeaways from this new detachment. It's got some really, really big implications for the Chaos Space Marines player. There's one more, and this is also really, really important. You have 1 mandatory HQ, and then you can add an additional 3, which means previously you were running battalion detachments in order to get 3 HQs, and it was often really, really hard to choose which 3 because they're all really, really good. Now we get a 4th HQ without spending any additional command points. So this is really, really powerful because it means that you can go, okay, cool, I'm going to take a Master of Possessions, I'm going to take a Dark Apostle, I'm going to take a Lord Discordant, and I'm going to take a Demon Prince. And now you can really flesh out that sort of HQ section of your army with extra units without any additional cost. Further to this, it says in there that the patrol detachment still exists. So that makes me think that other detachments probably still exist as well. So imagine going, okay, let's say hypothetically a battalion detachment exists, right? You go, cool, I'm going to take a battalion, 3 HQs. Then I'm going to take an Arcs of Omen detachment for another 4 HQs. And then maybe you take a Supreme Commander detachment and put Abaddon in there. So it's hard to say for now. They haven't been 100% clear on that, but they have said the patrollers still exist, so it's reasonable to think the others still exist. So you could really just go hard on the Chaos Space Marine HQs. Might not necessarily be competitively viable, because obviously then you're giving up a ton of assassinate points. That being said, it looks like the secondaries have been a big overhaul as well. So we'll get into those in a moment, but it's worth noting that if the secondaries have been overhauled in such a way that maybe Assassinate isn't as good, because there's other things that are better, or every faction now has access to several good secondaries, well, maybe you go, okay, cool, I can actually afford to build into characters and let them get Assassinate, because most armies are probably going to have lots of things that get them very easy secondaries. And if that's the case, well, then you can go, sick, I'm just going to run a fuck ton of characters and just YOLO. In the same way that Knight players don't kick up a stink because they're giving up full Bring It Down, you know? you'll just go, cool, well, this is the other version of that. You know, I'm giving up full assassinate, but I've got a really, really powerful army that's just going to wreck your face. So that's a few things, just Chaos Space Marine specific takeaways from this Arcs of Omen detachment. Alright, the next one we have is the Battle Brothers Allied Detachment. So if your Arcs of Omen detachment contains an Imperium detachment, blah blah blah. If your Arcs of Omen's Genesteal Cult, Brood Brothers, blah blah blah. But here's the one, if your Arcs of Omen detachment is a Thousand Suns detachment, you can include one Legiones Daemonica Patrol detachment that only contains units with the Tzeentch keyword as an allied detachment. Okay, so this is the one that I find really interesting. So first of all, they've only mentioned Tzeentch. They haven't said whether or not Death Guard can take a Nurgle detachment or whether World Eaters can take a, Khorne detachment. But interestingly, they've said that you can take a patrol as an allied detachment. So I'm guessing there's going to be some specific rule in there saying that allied detachments don't break army-wide benefits. Otherwise, you would just be like, cool, I'm just going to take, a detachment of these guys anyway, like an Agents of Chaos, Tzeentch, Demons detachment. So they're clearly going to be breaking up the way that those sorts of allied, units work. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I hope they do something similar for the World Eaters, unless, of course, the World Eaters might have this included in their codex. But that wouldn't explain why they haven't done this for the Death Guard. They've done it for the Thousand Suns. So I'm guessing that this is just a partial view of what we're, getting. And that's why we've only mentioned Tzeentch. Alright, next up we have a stratagem. So it's a requisition, so you spend it before the game in your list. Use the stratagem before the battle when mustering your army. If a detachment ability would limit the number of units times you can take a unit in a detachment to 1, you can include a maximum of 2 of that unit in the detachment instead. You can only use this stratagem once. Alrighty, so that means that Chaos Lords and Demon Princes are able to work together in 4s. You can, you can take, because most of the time that's going to say you can only take those units once per detachment. But now you're going to be able to take them twice. It will cost you a command point to do so, but who cares? You're starting with more command points than you were previously because you get a free detachment. So being able to take multiple Demon Princes is going to be really, really strong, because sometimes you want to take the Nurgle one with the Golax, the Decayed Relic, because he's really good at killing wound cap things like Abaddon, killing Catan. He's really strong, he does all these crazy things. But you might also want to take a Tzeentch one because he can cast an action and a psychic power for a stratagem. He's really hard to kill because he's got that, reduce the first failed save to 0. So often it can be hard deciding which one of those two you want to take. Maybe you want to take the Slaaneshi one with the Intoxicating Elixir, so he has a phase cap. Often it was really hard to decide which one of those Demon Princes you wanted. Well, now you can just take 2. And further to that, because of the Arcs of Omen detachment, you have more slots. So you can actually justify taking 2. So now you have justification and ability. I think we're going to start seeing lists with multiple Demon Princes running around. Alright, the next interesting point is it says here, several missions have been updated to provide new challenges for experienced commanders. In particular, the timing on when you score your primary objectives has been tweaked, making for a more even experience regardless of who won the role to go first. That's quite interesting. Currently, you score your points at the end of the command phase for primary. So and then obviously at the end of the game, in that battle round 5, the player who went second scores them at the end of the turn instead of at the end of their command phase. So they're changing that up. I wonder whether or not they're going to make it so that round 5 ability applies to the player who goes second the whole time instead of just in round 5. Because a lot of people would argue that going first is really powerful because you get to do the Alpha Strike, you get to do the massive damage before your opponent gets an opportunity to swing back. So often the person who goes second needs a bit of a helping hand. So this is what they've done for turn 5 previously. Maybe they're just extending that further in. That could be what they're talking about here. Or they could be changing up the way it works. It might be, at the end of the battle round, you score your your primary points instead of at the start of your command phase. So that way, whoever's going second gets an opportunity to knock the first player off of the objectives and then end a battle round score. And then you start the new battle round. So it could be one of those two. I can't say for sure, obviously. I actually am slightly worried about this because I really like the current primary. I really like the way that it's scored. I think it creates for a really dynamic game where you've got to try and be there on the command phase. You've got to survive 1 turn. Both players have to survive 1 turn, but the person who goes second gets that advantage late game. And I find that often I find myself wanting to go second. So if they're going to try and create a situation where they're giving even more advantage to the person who's going second, then I'm a little concerned. So we'll see how it comes out when we get a bit more information. But yeah, just know that they're changing up that primary, and the way that that's going to impact Chaos Space Marine players is completely unknown because we don't know what these changes are going to be specifically. Alright, last but not least, they have a huge collection of new and revised secondary objectives to shake up the competitive scene. Along with universal objectives, there are specific goals for each faction, including new Leagues of Votann and World Eaters. Each of the iconic Space Marine chapters and Traitorous Astartes legions also get a new secondary objective of their own. Basically, one of the things they actually mentioned in the video that came along with these leaks was that every faction or sub-faction is going to be getting 3 and no more. So currently there's a few factions out there that have 4 different secondaries to choose from, which gives them a huge advantage in the game. And then there's other ones like World Eaters, for example, who only have 1. They've basically said that they're all going to have 3, which means all of your Chaos Space Marine legions are getting extra secondary options, which is huge. Every legion is going to have multiple. World Eaters are going to have multiple, which is really, really exciting. And they actually gave us one in here that we'll go through in a second that's really, really spicy. But one of the biggest disadvantages Chaos Space Marines have had over the past 6 months is that their secondary objectives are more or less all garbage. You know, they're all at the top level of competitive play. Every single one of those secondary objectives, whether it be Long War or the Glory or whatever, right? They're all pretty easy to play around. There's a few Legion-specific ones like Specimens for the Spider that are quite good, but by and large, they're really bad. And most Chaos Space Marine competitive players just take the generic ones. And that gives our opponents a pretty big advantage because we often struggle with our third pick. You know, like we've got 2 that we're pretty confident with, but the third one can be quite difficult to select. So expanding that is only ever a good thing, you know. And also, we've got a bit of an indication on what they're going to do to the existing ones because we've got the Emperor's Children one here, which is really, really spicy. So let's have a look at that. All right, it's still called Adorn the Canvas Eclectic. And basically now, at the end of each turn, score 1 victory point for each of the following conditions. Controlling more objective markers, destroying more units with ranged attacks, destroying more units with melee attacks, or killing an enemy. One or more character was destroyed by an attack made by an Emperor's Children character from your army. So previously this was at the end of the battle round. You scored these. Now you score it at the end of each turn, which makes this secondary freaking crazy. Basically now you're going to get more victory points. You're going to get victory points if you kill more in your own turn. So chances are your opponent's not really killing much of you in your turn if you're playing it well, right? So you kill a unit in shooting, you're going to get that point because they're not going to kill anything with ranged attacks in your turn, unless you like Overwatch die or something like that. But basically, you're now going to be able to go, cool, easily get that kill more in shooting, get kill more in combat. You know, your opponent, you jump onto more objectives, your opponent can't really stop you. Boom, there you go. There's your 3 or 4 victory points this turn. And then you also are going to generate these in your opponent's turn. So if they go to fight you and you go, oh, cool, I'm going to fight first over here and kill these 2 units, and then they kill one of your units. So cool, in your turn, I killed more in melee, so I'm going to get an additional command point. If you're going up against a purely combat army and they go to charge you, now you might be incentivized to Overwatch, to kill a unit in Overwatch if you can. You know, maybe you've got full rerolls to hit from Abaddon or something like that. You go, cool, rerolling to hit, and now I'm killing more with ranged attacks. Or you might go, cool, they're going to fall back and you're going to spend the CP to use the Slaneshi ability to shoot the enemy as they fall back from you. Kill that enemy, cool. That was something that you killed with a ranged attack. So changing this to be a turn-based instead of battle round-based is massive. And that makes me think that some of the other Chaos Space Marine secondaries are going to get a similar sort of treatment. You know, we might see the Black Legion's action complete at the end of your turn as opposed to in the next command phase. Things like that. And that small change can make all of these secondaries completely viable once again. Alpha Legion being able to flip objective markers, if they can do that in the same turn instead of having to wait for subsequent turns, then Alpha Legion are going to be fucking terrifying. So I think what we're going to do is when this drops and we see what all those secondaries are, that's going to play a very big role in which legions rise to the top. You know, the legions with the best secondaries, because realistically, most of the legions can field similar strength. You know, the differences in strength aren't massive. Like Black Legion are very strong. You know, Creations of Baal are very strong. Emperor's Children very strong, but they're not that much stronger than Alpha Legion. You know, they're not. It's not like they're a completely different world. You know, the Terminators are still tough as fuck. You know, the Disco Lord still punches really hard. You know, there's still all of these elements that are going to function very similar. So if one of them gets a secondary objective that's really good, well then that'll make a strong case for running that Legion. Alright, and the only other thing mentioned in the article is that this is coming soon, which who knows when that is for GW. And it also mentions that it's going to have a balanced data slate as well, and new points cost updates. And the points cost updates will be a free download online, as will the balanced data slate. So this is the book that you'll have to buy, which will have all your secondaries, your missions, your detachments, and all that sort of stuff. And then there'll be the updates as well, which will be available online. Points cost wise, I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't know whether maybe Chaos Terminators are going to go up in points because they're a very popular unit right now. Abaddon might go up in points, or we might see a widespread decrease of points costs on some of the less taken units. This is the direction that I hope GW go. Instead of nerfing good things, I would rather see them buff the bad things, you know, because then there's no feels bad moments, right? Nobody's sitting there going, oh, my favorite unit was just nerfed. But if they buff all of the stuff that's not as good, well then it's sort of like a passive nerf, right? It's sort of like effectively those units just got worse without actually making them worse. So if they do that, I'd love to see a few things. I'd love to see Legionnaires become a little bit cheaper so that they're a little bit more viable. I'd love to see like the Forge Fiends, the Mauler Fiends, you know, Helldrakes, all of those sorts of demon engines come down a little bit. I would also really hope that they would, at the same time, and I know this is clutching for straws, but I would really like to see them update the Imperial Armor book. You know, give that an FAQ, give that a points cost reduction, you know, because a lot of the units in there are just completely suboptimal now. Like, you look at the Spartan battle tank and you compare it to a Land Raider, and it's like, why the fuck would you ever take a Spartan? It's 1 billion points more, and it's easier to kill because the Land Raider's T9 now. You know, it's got the 2-up save. It's, you know, it's really tough. Whereas the Spartans, that was its whole shtick, was the 2-up save, but now it hasn't got that. So hopefully they can, you know, adjust the points costs of all that Forge World stuff to bring it into line with the new stuff. I'm not expecting new data sheets for any of that stuff, but points cost updates on them would be really nice. And then, yeah, it's just some of the less popular, less common units in the Chaos Space Marine book, like the Predator, you know. Make the Predator good. Predators are cool, you know, but currently they just get overlooked for other units. So if we got some points reductions on those things, particularly the shooting elements of the Codex, because that's somewhere where the Codex currently lacks. Whereas if Predators went down to 100 points each or something ridiculous like that, all of a sudden you'd see 3 Chaos Predators in every list. And then you'd actually go, wow, now Chaos armies can shoot and do combat. Whereas at the moment it's like, why would you bother taking almost any of the units with guns? They're all overcosted. They're all suboptimal because there's no synergies with stuff, so you just don't include them and you just take combat. So that would be a really cool thing to see. I'd like to see the points costs fixed on some of those units. But yeah, let me know what you'd like to see points cost wise. Let me know what you guys think of these new detachments. Do you think they're exciting? What sort of builds do you think we're going to start seeing? I personally think we're going to start seeing people abandon troops and go heavy and skew into those elites for Chaos Space Marines. I think you're going to see a lot more Possessed on the table, a lot more Chosen on the table, a lot more Terminators. It might even pivot into more of an MSU style list where you just run, you know, 3 Master of Executions, 4 HQs, and then like 9 or, you know, whatever. I think 6 is the max you could take elites. You just go, cool, 3 Possessed, 3 Chosen, a couple of Rhinos, fuck ton of characters, make it all Creations of Baal so it all fights on death, and just full send. You know, it'll all depend on the secondary objectives and it'll all depend on, you know, a lot of, you know, moving parts. But that's something that I could realistically envision for the future. So let me know what you guys think. Let's get a conversation going down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Make sure to check out my Patreon. We have a sick Discord community over there where we do one-on-one coaching, we do list building, we talk these things out, which is going to be really, really helpful in the coming months when we start going, okay, back to the drawing board, let's start again. So when we're coming up with these new list concepts, a lot of the coaching and a lot of the advice that I give directly to players is on that Discord community, and you can sign up for as low as $4 a month, which is $1 a week. So check that out. That's really cool. And also, you know, if you want to show support for the channel, you can do so by buying shirts like this one here. I've got neoprene objective markers out there. On Patreon, I'm giving away dice. Patreon exclusive dice are up on that Patreon, so check that out. And as always, like, subscribe, share, comment, all that good shit that the YouTube algorithm loves. And thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Look for the Blood God.